Ready? Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome. Is it evening or afternoon? It's afternoon still. Okay, it's afternoon. So good afternoon. And welcome to this is going to be remarkable. And these events are extraordinary. So I am thrilled that you're here today. And it is my pleasure, and I'll take a few minutes to do it, to introduce Professor Sascha Stollhans. That was the appropriate response. Well done. So 1-0 to the crowd. So Professor Stollhans has held posts at Newcastle University, Nottingham, Manchester, and Lancaster University before coming to the best university in that list, here to the University of Leeds. This is the best and most impressive line of appointments. Professor Stollhans joined us as part of our cluster hiring to support the education strategy more broadly and curriculum redefined in particular. We hired a number, some of you are in this room, truly excellent colleagues, as Professor Stollhans exemplifies. His contributions have been particularly impressive over the last few years and demonstrably excellent. Professor Stollhans has held, get this list I'm about to walk you through. He hasn't been here that long. So here are the roles that he's held since he's joined us. He was Digital Education Academic Lead and Director of Scholarship in the School of Languages, Cultures, and Societies. He led the Center for Excellence in Language Teaching. He is now the Academic Lead for the University Student Success Center, which is an important body of work, and Pro-Dean for Student Education in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Cultures. He never sleeps. And I think this is important, and also not surprisingly, and saying not surprisingly, I don't want to diminish this in the least. He was promoted for his excellence in student education. A round of applause for that. So in his talk this evening, we will hear Professor Stollhans unpack his longstanding interest in language across education, science, and scholarship. This focus, like across those three areas, is characteristic of his commitments to make language teaching and learning more inclusive. So let me close with just a couple of sort of personal notes. So we haven't worked together that long, but it's extraordinary, and I mean this sincerely, how much I have learned from him in a short period of time. In Professor Stollhans, we have among us a colleague who I think distinguishes himself by his intelligence and his kindness being a virtue that I value exceptionally highly. I think it's a superpower. He has it. And also, I've seen him act with deep integrity and courage over the last couple of years. And watching him act with integrity and courage, that's when I have learned a few tricks from him. And I don't know if I've said this to you, but I'm impressed. And it's really been a pleasure to work with you in this regard. But let me close in this vein with an anecdote. For 20 years now, when I meet an alum of an institution, I've been doing it for 4 years here, 20 years across lifespan, I ask alums of universities one question. Always asking this question. I've been doing it for 20 years. And I phrase it really carefully. I say, so tell me, what, and I emphasize what about your university experience made a real difference in your life? And every single answer across 20 years is a who. It's always a who. Sascha is one of those who's. So with that, Professor Stollhans, come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. My notes say thank you, Jeff, for the kind introduction, but I don't think I can call this kind, for this extremely generous lovely and really kind introduction. Thank you also to Emma, Professor Emma Cayley, our head of school, who will be providing a little response after this lecture. I look forward to hearing that. And thank you to all of you for coming. It's really lovely to see so many friends, colleagues, and indeed students in the room. And I look forward to sharing some of my journey as an academic, but also some of my thoughts and ideas about language with you. Now, I wanted to start by answering a question that quite a few of you have asked me when the Eventbrite for this lecture came up. Several people have asked me about one specific thing on the Eventbrite. So let's start by addressing the penguin in the room. Yes, it worked. So the question was, what's with the penguins? Why the penguins? I have to go back a little bit to answer this question. So when Anne Goodman from the research office, who have done a really brilliant job at organizing all this, so thank you for that, asked me for a picture to represent the lecture, to go on the Eventbrite, but for the advertising for the lecture, I did the typical academic thing. I started overthinking it. So I thought about it really long and hard, and I thought about what can I use, what kind of picture. I actually made a short list, and I'm going to show you some of the pictures that ended up on my short list. These three ended up on my short list. This is something I do, the linguistics language nerd that I am. When I travel, and I absolutely love traveling, I take pictures of sort of interesting linguistic things that I spot in the wild. And the first picture there is a van I saw in Switzerland, and I was just really intrigued by it because it shows Swiss, I think it's Basel dialect, actually written phonetically. And it's not something we see too much. Then the second one, I don't know, can someone guess what language that is? It's Maltese, exactly. And Maltese is a language I find really fascinating. So I took this picture in Valletta in Malta, because Maltese is derived from medieval Arabic spoken in and around Sicily. So it is heavily influenced by Romance languages, while also having obviously the Arabic influence. And it's written in the Latin script. So I think it's a really fascinating language. And you can also see in there the word playground borrowed from English, integrated in with il, what I think will be the article. I'm not going to go too deep into my nerdism now, but that's the kind of thing I find really fascinating. And the third one is very recently, when I got promoted, I treated myself to a little trip to Lisbon. And in Lisbon, I saw this advert for KFC. Sorry, other fast food chains are available. And I thought it's really interesting because the English word bucket was used, and it was given a diminutive ending, which I've now found out is actually not a real Portuguese diminutive ending, but a Spanish one. So I'm not quite sure what they did there, but I think it's really fascinating. So these were on my short list, but then I thought probably a little bit too specific, probably needs a bit of explanation. So I decided against these pictures. Then I thought, what can I do? So I thought I'd be all modern and down with the kids, and I just asked ChatGPT to create a picture for me. So I gave ChatGPT the title and the abstract for my lecture and asked it to produce a picture, and this is what it produced. I actually think it's quite cool. Yeah, the interesting thing is it made up a word. I think I would pronounce it scolasopy. Sounds a bit like an illness. I was intrigued by it. I actually asked it, why did you make up this word? What does it mean? It says, oh, sometimes I just make up words. It's just what I do. So I kind of decided against this as well. So after thinking about it way too long and way too hard, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to use a picture that I like. So there's no deeper meaning. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I just like penguins. I've always liked penguins. I've always found them really fascinating creatures. I've always been really intrigued by them. And this is a picture I took in Cape Town when I spent 6 months in Cape Town as a student. And I was the happiest person in the world when I saw penguins in real life for the first time. Now, this probably isn't really satisfying for you because I'm supposed to be a professor now and all that. So you might want me to provide some deeper meaning and some more intellectual depth. So I can, if you insist, because there's actually something really interesting about the etymology of the word penguin. So where the word comes from and why we call penguins penguins. So there's two interesting theories. One of them is penguin in Welsh literally means white head. It's exactly penguin, meaning white head. So this is one major theory, that it's either called because they have these white sort of like ring on their heads. There's other ideas why it might be that. And interestingly, the Scottish Gaelic word for penguin, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, literally means white head as well. Another theory is that it comes from the Latin pinguis, which means fat, because they're fat animals or oily animals, I don't know. Which is an interesting one as well, because an old German and Dutch word for penguin is Fettgans, which means fat goose. So we don't really know. We are not very decided. We can't really tell. But that is, I thought it was quite interesting, and I fell down a rabbit hole when I was researching this. Okay, that's why the penguins. Now, the next thing I would like to reflect on is the title I chose for this lecture. So the first bit of the title, Watch Your Language. I chose this, and maybe in a bit of a provocative way, or maybe I wanted to get you to think about this phrase a little bit. I think it's a phrase we tend to associate with parents in response to their children swearing, watch your language, or just language. But I also think it's really interesting because we all watch language. We all pay attention to language. Language is something that we find fascinating as humans. We can't help it. It's very natural. And we all have views and opinions about language and preferences. So I like the sound of French. I don't really like the sound of German. This word sounds really great. I like this. That's completely normal and fine. What we do with those preferences and opinions, that is the more problematic question. This is a quote that my colleague Alice Kaur, who I work with on a research project, found for a chapter we have been writing for a handbook about linguistics in education. And it's a quote by Saussure, who was a Swiss linguist and is often considered one of the founding figures of Western linguistics. And I think it really captures this really nicely. So he said, the importance of linguistics to general culture, or to language to general culture, is obvious. In the lives of individuals and societies, speech is more important than anything else. And that linguistics should continue to be the prerogative of a few specialists would be unthinkable. Everyone is concerned with it in one way or another. But there is no other field in which so many absurd notions, prejudices, mirages, and fictions have sprung up. The task of the linguist is to condemn them and dispel them as best as they can. So Sue wasn't very good at using gender-inclusive language, as you can see. I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think this is a really nice quote that I think really captures this and illustrates what I'm trying to say in this lecture. Now, the next part of my title was A Linguist's Tale of Education, Science, and Scholarship. And I was deliberately not very specific there. What I actually mean is a linguist's tale of language education, language science, and language scholarship. So this represents the structure of the lecture from now on. And I will give you a little bit of an overview of some of the areas that I'm interested in. But on the slides, I've also provided lots of links, so I hope we can find a way to share the slides afterwards. There's a QR code at the end as well if you want to have them straight away, just in case there's an area you're really interested in and you want to look into deeper. Now, the first 2 points, education and science, they're going to really set the scene. I'm going to reflect a little bit on language education, including my own language education. Then I'm going to tell you a bit about language science, which I'm using as a synonym for linguistics here, which is not uncontroversial, but it was just for purposes of this lecture. And then under scholarship, I'm going to tell you about 2 of my research projects that try to really bring language education and language science together. Now, I consulted ChatGPT again, to be honest, because inaugural lectures are a bit of a funny genre. So I asked ChatGPT, what makes a good inaugural lecture? And it told me, quote, a good inaugural professorial lecture is part celebration, part storytelling, and part scholarship. It's your chance to showcase your academic journey, communicate your passion for your field, and connect with both expert and non-expert audiences. People love stories, especially personal ones, that offer insight into your motivations, challenges, or turning points. So I'm going to be talking about myself as well, if you forgive me. And whenever I do that, I'm going to illustrate this using this drawing. This is me, drawn by a student on a module evaluation form when we still did them on paper. So quite a while ago. And I think it's honestly one of the most flattering depictions of myself that I've seen. So I'm going to use this to illustrate any personal stories. And I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with a personal story. I'm going to start with my personal journey as a linguist, as a language learner, as a language enthusiast. So education and me, to give you a bit of an idea where I'm coming from with all this. Now, you will know, or you might have guessed by now, that I grew up in Germany, in a very small conservative town in northwest Germany. And languages weren't really that much around me when I grew up. So it took really formal school education to introduce me to languages and language learning and traveling as well. So I was from a family that wasn't particularly well off, so we didn't really have the means to travel, and I never really got out. So when I went to school, I started learning English in year 5. Nowadays in Germany, it's usually year 1 or sometimes year 3, depending where you are. But that was the first compulsory language. I didn't have a choice. We all had to do it. And I kind of enjoyed it. It was quite nice learning English. I wasn't particularly in love with it, I admit, but I kind of enjoyed it. But then I met my real first love, which was French. So I started French in year 7. In year 7, I had the choice between French and Latin, and I chose French. And interestingly, one of the first sentences we learned is this sentence, meaning Arthur is a parrot. And it's one of those, it's really stuck with me. Then in year 9, we had to choose the other language that we didn't choose before. So for me, that was Latin. And I kind of came full circle because I looked it up again, because the first sentence in my Latin textbook was Britain is an island. Which I thought was very interesting. Now, I wanted to briefly talk about Latin because Latin was actually a really amazing experience for me learning Latin. It really helped me understand grammar and structures much more deeply, but also really develop my analytical thinking, which I didn't understand in year 9, but I understand now. And it really helped me as well, because back then when I went to university a while ago, and I went to study linguistics and French. Back then, you still had to have Latin to be able to study French. It's not really the case anymore, but back then it was still the case. So I went to university. I started a degree in linguistics and French. I didn't really know what linguistics was. I just had a teacher who said, "Oh, you're such a talented linguist, Sascha. You have to do something with your languages." I thought, "Oh, linguistics sounds interesting." So the analytical, scientific study of language, let's give it a go. And I ended up really enjoying it. So part of the reason why I'm sharing this with you is my school education, and particularly my teachers, and I was really lucky to have some absolutely brilliant language teachers. They really instilled this lifelong passion for language learning in me. But also it really showed me how powerful and life-changing education can be. Because as I said before, with my family, we never traveled. I was never out of the town that I grew up with, but then I was able to take part in school exchanges. I went to France. I stayed with a French host family, and it was brilliant. I had one really horrible experience in France as well. I had several quite horrible experiences in France. But again, that made me the person who I am now as well. And it really, really showed me what there is out there. When I was at university, then I very, very quickly in my second year decided I'll just go to South Africa for 6 months, because why not? To do an internship teaching German, which then instilled my interest and passion for teaching as well. So it all kind of worked out for me, and I feel really lucky that it did the way it did. Now, as I said before, this is sort of like to share with you who I am and where I come from, and maybe also explains why my personal experience has had a really, really big impact on me as both a researcher, as an educator, and also as an advocate for language learning in the UK. And many of you, and I really don't want this to be a doom and gloom lecture, so I'm going to keep this really brief, but many of you will be familiar with the challenges that we face around language learning in the UK, but also around education within the arts and humanities in more general terms. But given that I have experienced firsthand how transformative education and languages can be, I really want everyone to be able to have this experience. So I've been really advocating for this. Now, to set the scene a little bit about the situation in the UK, You will know a lot of this, but please allow me to just go into detail on some of these things. You will be aware in the UK we have a devolved education system, so it's actually really, really hard to generalize. And forgive me, some of the following things are quite England-centric. It just happens when you work within an English context. Now, in England, some form of language instruction is compulsory at primary level, but actual practice actually varies. So sometimes this is more about language awareness, sometimes it's a little bit introducing one language, but yeah, there's no unified approach to this. Now, this graph that you can see on the left, it shows the development of A-level entries in French, Spanish, and German, which are historically or traditionally the three mainstream languages taught in schools, which again in itself could be an issue, which we could discuss. And the development of the uptake between 2010 and 2023. And you can see there is a clear downward trend. With Spanish, it's a little bit hit and miss, up and down. But in 2023, German had the largest decrease going down 16%. Compared to other subjects in England, French and Spanish saw the third and fourth largest decrease at nearly 11%. If you actually go further back, you will see the trend really is like this. For GCSE, I did some analysis of this year's GCSE results for this paper in the conversation. And for GCSE, what's important to note is that languages stopped being compulsory at this stage in 2004. And since then, the number of students taking a language at GCSE has fallen significantly from consistently over 550,000 before 2004 to just over 370,000 in 2024. Some languages, German in particular, have taken a particularly hard hit. So German has fallen from over 125,000 to this year's just over 35,000. For comparison, maths GCSEs, 878,000 entries this year, and combined sciences, 980,000. Now, this of course has a knock-on effect on universities, university degrees, and we are kind of dealing with this vicious circle. Fewer young people studying languages at school means fewer people studying languages at university, means fewer qualified language teachers, means fewer people to teach languages, and schools then closing down. You can see it's really problematic, very difficult to get out of. We have been seeing what's been happening around the country. We've seen what's been happening at Cardiff, but lots of other institutions as well. Closures, restructuring. One really, really good initiative, in my view, that lots of universities have taken is the introduction of ab initio programs. So these are language programs where students can study a degree in a language without prior knowledge of the language. And within their first year or two, they will follow an accelerated curriculum studying or focusing on language acquisition. As I said, I don't want to be all doom and gloom about this because there's lots of positive things, and the languages community, the languages sector is incredibly collaborative and incredibly innovative in response to this. But some of the sort of like major issues and challenges or criticisms include this argument that everybody speaks English, which A, isn't true, and B, is not a good argument. That artificial intelligence means we don't really need to speak languages anymore because Google Translate can do this for me, AI can do this for me. Again, not a good argument. I don't have time to go into this, but I think you all agree that this is not a good argument. The geopolitical landscape we're dealing with is not exactly one that promotes intercultural understanding and language learning. Brexit really didn't help. The misconception that the UK is a monolingual country, which is absolute rubbish, if you forgive me. 1 in 5 children in the UK speak a language other than English at home. And we are not a monolingual country, we definitely aren't. Multilingualism is a lived experience for many. A real practical problem is harsh grading in schools. So there's a perception and a reality, in my view, that languages are graded particularly harshly at GCSE and A-level. And then there's other things. This is debate about what actually is language. Is language an instrument, a skill, or is language an academic discipline? So is it about transactional knowledge? Is it about being able to order a coffee? Or is it about this rich academic discipline that includes culture and literature and history and society? I mean, from the way I'm saying this, you can probably see which side I am on. So as I said, not all doom and gloom. I think there's lots of positive things happening, but we need to be aware of this very, very challenging context that we operate in. Okay. Now, before I move on, those people who are not hiding at the back in the room will have seen that there's a little quiz for you on your tables. People at home will be able to see this on the slide. I've got 5 pictures here for you. And this is a language riddle overall. My question for you is, what do these pictures have in common? The first one is a fence, particularly a German fence. The second one is a garden, and it's actually a Dutch garden. The third one is a town, an English town. The fourth one is an Irish fortress. And the fifth one is an English lonely or maybe very happy singleton. Have a think about this. I'll give you the answer at the end, or we can talk about the solution at the end. Okay, now moving on to the next point on the agenda, the program, whatever you call this, in the lecture, in the structure of my lecture. The next point, language science. Now, as I said, it's not really completely uncontroversial to call linguistics a language science, but I did it because it has like a nice rhythm to it, education, science, and scholarship. But you can also see quotes or people defining linguistics as a science. So this is one of them, Fromkin saying linguistics is a scientific study of human language. A linguist is a scientist who investigates human language in all its facets, its structure, its use, its history, its place in society. To me, linguistics is probably the most fascinating subject because it is so broad and it spans the arts and humanities, the social sciences, the natural sciences, the computer sciences, because you can look at language from all these different angles. That's what I love about it. It's so inherently interdisciplinary and so versatile. Why am I talking about linguistics here? You will realize that later. But I think it's just to set the scene, really talk about education and then about linguistics, and you can see how that sort of both really talk to each other in my research projects. One of the things I've been working on with a group of people, I've been working on a project called the Linguistics in Modern Foreign Languages project, which looks at how linguistics is integrated into language teaching and learning, or how it isn't integrated into language teaching and learning. I will tell you a bit more about the project in a minute. But one of the things we did was an intervention where because linguistics isn't really taught in schools, so we created little classes, little lessons to be taught, and we delivered them in a number of schools to introduce especially language learners to linguistics. And then afterwards, we asked them for a definition. So what do you now think linguistics is? And this is one we got from a student who highlighted how linguistics allows you to really understand languages better and to think more about your own language and the differences and similarities between other languages. We also asked the teachers who didn't necessarily have training in linguistics either to give us definitions. And this was one I particularly like, saying linguistics is learning about language. It's the scientific basis. It highlights the huge social, cultural, and cognitive and environmental elements of language. It improves cultural capital, and it's something all language teachers should have. So you might wonder, so what is the connection between language education and linguistics? What is the relationship between these two areas? And that's a question I'm really fascinated by and I'm really, really interested in, because it seems quite intuitive that these two areas should be going hand in hand and should be closely linked. But if you look at actual practice, you will find that there probably isn't enough of a connection. That's what I would say. Some scholars go way further. Dick Hudson talks about a knowledge about language desert, about a linguistics desert within language education. And he refers this to both the secondary and the higher education sector for slightly different yet similar reasons. Let's talk about higher education first. This is what he says about the knowledge about language desert in higher education, language teaching and learning language departments, in a very thought-provoking piece in the British Academy Journal. So he says, most university departments of foreign languages are places where language has low status. It's seen as a skill, not as an object to be studied systematically. The status and power lie with experts in literature and culture. Apologies to my literature and culture colleagues in the room. I wouldn't like to contribute to this separation or divide or rivalry because I think it's not very helpful. And of course, language is culture too, and the connection between language and culture and literature is really important because it embeds language learning into cultural contexts, which in my view is absolutely crucial and language really can be the key to intercultural understanding. But I think it's an interesting one, because Lodge is another scholar who makes this distinction between language as a discipline and language as an instrument, which I've mentioned before. Now, Hudson bases his observations on research he has done on French departments at Russell Group universities. And in 2011, back in 2011, he looked at 18 French departments at Russell Group universities and found that 7 of them offered no courses in linguistics at all. I've been doing something similar for German, but I'm not just Russell Group. I want to be a bit more inclusive. So I looked at all the German departments, all the departments that currently offer German degrees in the UK, and I counted 35. And I found that only 11 of them, so less than a third, offer courses in linguistics as part of their undergraduate German studies degree. So I think Hudson's point, as provocative as it may be, it kind of stands. Sometimes you even see job descriptions, job adverts, looking for a lecturer in modern languages that specifically say people with a background in linguistics need not apply, which to me it couldn't be more ironic. So I do agree with Hudson. It's astonishing, somewhat absurd that linguistics is not really an essential part of language learning. Very different at Leeds, where linguistics is part of LCS, of the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies, which I think is great. I'm not a musicologist. I can see musicologists in the room, but I always compare it with music. And maybe I'm completely wrong, and then I stand corrected. I think it's probably unthinkable that you can study an entire degree in music at a university like Leeds without ever encountering music theory. Correct me if I'm wrong. So why can you do a languages degree without ever encountering the systematic and analytical study of language? It is quite absurd. I think it also narrows our discipline down and kind of eschews a very valuable subdiscipline. And I'm not saying that linguistics is just a subdiscipline. It's obviously much more complex than that. So please don't get me wrong. I think we might miss a trick as well, because certain students are really, really interested and fascinated by this. And I think in terms of recruitment of students, we might be missing a trick, not really reaching all the students we could be reaching. Okay, now I'm actually going to talk about my research. And I would like to introduce you to 2 of my projects that really try to bring these areas together, my interest in linguistics, but also my interest in language teaching and learning. So the first one is something I've been working on for quite a while, sociolinguistic variation in language teaching and learning. And I'm going to show you what that actually means and what I've been finding there. And the second one is I'm going to very, very briefly at the end talk about this project that I mentioned before, where we've been trying to introduce linguistics into language teaching and learning in schools. Starting with the first one. Now, we sometimes talk about a language like it's one sort of clearly defined, unified thing, the French language. I am learning Arabic. In English, you say it like this, but that actually couldn't be further from the truth. Languages are extremely complex and extremely diverse as the people who use it. So I'm going to show you some examples of variation, and I'm going to use German as an example, partly because it's my language, partly because I think maybe quite a few of you don't really know that much about German. Maybe I'm wrong. And I'm going to start with what we call regional variation. I'm going to show you something that many linguists are a bit bored of, and that's the bread roll debate. Are you aware of the bread roll debate? So what do you call a bread roll in your area of the country? And there's a similar debate. I mean, I don't think it's quite as sort of prominent within the German context, but there's definitely lots of different ways to say bread roll in German. This is German-speaking Europe. This is Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So you can see lots of variation there, lots of different words for bread roll. So this is lexical variation. So which words we use depending on where we are. But we also have grammatical variation. This is about possessives. So how we say that something belongs to someone. So how do you say Anna's key? And you can see it varies here from literally Anna's key to the key of Anna, the key of the Anna, and some others, depending on where you are. And then we also have phonetic variation, so pronunciation, how pronunciation varies. This is how you pronounce the word Zeug, which means stuff. So how do you pronounce the final consonant? Do you pronounce it like sh or like sh? So Zeug, Zeug, or Zeug. Now, the one thing I just really want you to understand is how colorful these maps are and what that tells us. And I think it gives you a real idea of how diverse and colorful languages are. Now, there's not just regional variation, but language varies in many different ways. Here, I've written a list of potential greetings in English, so ways in which you might say hello in English. Just give you 10 seconds to look at this list and think about it, and think about which of these greetings you might use, which you might not use, and why. Okay, so the first one is from Shakespeare, is Hamlet. But what you can see here really is how we say things. The language we use varies depending on the time, place, medium. So is it written? Is it oral? Is it something in between? Is it digital? Situation, which includes the audience, social and cultural factors. And this is a very common way to look at linguistic diversity. I quite like this picture. And these dia words are just fancy linguistic terms to say exactly that. So time, place, medium, situation, and social and cultural factors. Sometimes we also look at rough categories: regional variation, social and functional variation. But then there's a lot of idiomatic variation as well. So idiosyncratic variation, sorry. So every person speaks differently, uses language differently, and that varies as well. So the kind of structures I use, the kind of words I like to use, my pronunciation and accent, potentially even things like how I feel I should be polite and maybe what isn't polite. This can be very individual as well. And it varies given the context. Now, this kind of the way I'm talking to you right now is, I can assure you, is quite different from the way I'd be talking 2 hours down the pub with my friends. Language is wonderfully complex. And one last example I would like to give you is about pragmatics. Pragmatics is a linguistics subdiscipline that looks at broadly communicative conventions, or what we say by not saying it, or what we might imply. And also things like how to be polite and what is perceived to be polite. And believe me, politeness is very challenging. As a German in the UK, I learned that the hard way. This is a little clip, a little video, which I'm going to show you if it works. And this is from a TV program called First Dates. Don't know if you've seen this. It's where two people meet for the first time in a restaurant. They're on a date and they're filmed by doing it. And someone recorded it and put it on TikTok and gave it the title, British People Trying to Say Hello. I'm just going to play it. I think I counted 12 turns, so 12 ways to say hello in this little video. So this is the pragmatic dimension, and then to relate it to language teaching and learning, this stuff is extremely valuable and important for language learners. It's really important that we don't just teach words and grammar, that we also teach this. How are you polite? How do you interact in a different language? One area I'm personally really interested in is online language. So how does social media change the way we use language? These are tweets and a WhatsApp conversation, which is very authentic because I definitely didn't make it up. I think online communication is really, really interesting as well, because it has interesting elements of oral communication, but it's also different. It's also a variety in its own right. Lastly, an area I've been working on is gender inclusive, or how to use gender inclusive or gender neutral expressions, particularly in languages that have grammatical gender. I'm going to have to give you a bit of detail here. So in languages with grammatical gender, like German or French and lots of others, for example, every noun has a gender that is either explicitly marked or inherent. So a table in German would be he, and in French would be she. And if we want, in those languages, if we want to say something like the student, we either have to make that student masculine or feminine. There's no other way. And the same in the plural. So the students are here. Thank you to all the students who have come. If I were to say this in German, I would have to refer to male students or female students. There's not a neutral way to do it. Now, historically, the male version, the male form, has been used as the generic form, as the neutral form. Now, we probably don't need to discuss why it's problematic that the male is the generic, the neutral form. So people have been trying to move away from this and have been trying to come up with ways. So you can see lots of really creative ways in which people are trying to overcome this binary and are trying to find forms that seem more neutral. I'm not going to show you in detail what these look like, but there's really some fascinating options. And I'm really interested in what kind of things people come up with, how people talk about these things. I do a lot of attitudinal work, so I'm really interested in what people think about these things. And then, of course, what relevance they have for language teaching and learning, and what as language teachers we do with this. Similarly, non-binary or gender-neutral pronouns. I mean, we're quite lucky in English that we have they, and we can use it as a singular pronoun, and we always have. I mean, this is nothing new. This is nothing fancy. We always say when someone knocked at the door, we can always say, "Oh, can you tell them I'll be right out? Can you tell them?" There's nothing weird about that. But unfortunately, not all languages have this. So what they need to do is they need to invent new pronouns. So Swedish has a particular success story there. So hon in Swedish means she, and han means he. In Swedish, the pronoun hen was proposed as a gender-neutral pronoun. It's been proposed several times in history, but then at some point it really gathered momentum to the extent that it's now widely used in the media. It's even included in the official dictionary of the Swedish Academy. So I would probably predict maybe in 1 or 2 generations, people might not even know or realize anymore that this was an invention by people, which is a particular success story. Sadly, we don't have that in all the languages in which we need it yet. Okay, I could talk about this for hours, but I can see the time. So this is not just fascinating, but I think it's really, really important from a social justice point of view. This really is about equity and something that we very tangibly impacts people's lives. So I've been working with exam boards in England, a lot with AQA and Pearson, on advising them on how to deal with this within curricula, but also within assessments in schools. This is a blog from Pearson here, not one I wrote, but one they wrote after we've had a discussion about this, promoting inclusivity in the MFL classroom. But then sometimes in the media, you also see really funny things. A couple of years ago, colleagues at Cambridge University published some guidelines in the German department on how students might be able to be more gender inclusive when speaking German. And that was picked up by journalists who made all sorts of things of this. This was one of my favorite headlines. So German students accused of jumping in the Volkswagen. Which just shows me there's still a lot of work for us to do. Okay, now what do we do with all this in language classes? And that is a question that really, really fascinates me, especially if you consider the restraints of formal education, having a very limited number of contact hours, needing to prioritize. The Common European Framework for Languages has sociolinguistic appropriateness as its own category, which touches on some of what I've just mentioned. And I think it's quite good to have this as a frame of reference, but it's still not quite enough. So this is something I've been working on for quite a long time, which I've noticed when I look back at my sort of career and research outputs. And I've noticed that on the topic of diversity, if I had to pick what I think might be my three most significant outputs, I published one every 5 years, starting in 2015. So 5 seems to be my lucky number in that respect. Now, with all this, one thing that I found is that sort of my 3 main conclusions of some of this is that with languages that are pluricentric, which means that have different standards. In German, for example, we have the German standard of Germany, the German standard of Austria, the German standard of Swiss. We tend to teach one that is politically and historically dominant, which in the German context tends to be the German standard of Germany. So we don't really teach Austrian German as much as we could. Then there is a focus on what linguists might call conceptually written registers. So we tend to focus more on how to write than how to speak. And even I'm simplifying a little bit, and even in sort of like oral training, oral classes, we tend to teach the way you write rather than the way you speak, the diversity of the way you speak. For German, one of my favorite examples is the use of the simple past tense, the preterite tense, which German speakers don't tend to use when they speak. But yet, especially when I see students coming from with an A-level in German, I hear them use that a lot. And I used to tell them, well, this is maybe what the Queen or the King would sound like if they spoke German. It sounds odd to a German speaker. Again, I'm simplifying a little bit. And then the third thing is, and I've mentioned that I'm really interested in attitudinal work. So what do people think about all this? And this is both with teachers and with language learners. There's this very interesting spectrum between two extremes. One is this desire to sound authentic. I want to sound like a native speaker. I'm using native speaker in inverted commas because it's a really problematic term. And one, on the other hand, is this pressure to adhere to normative rules. But this is the correct way. And sometimes those don't really go together because native speakers don't always speak the way it's written down in some grammar book. So I just wanted to draw your attention to hot off the press, a very, very recent special issue of a journal that I co-edited with my colleague Judith Eberhardt, who is in the audience, on cultural and linguistic diversity in German language teaching and learning. When we put out the call for papers, we were really overwhelmed with fascinating proposals, and the articles we've now published touch on things like cultural and linguistic diversity in contemporary textbooks, multilingual writing, teaching dialects and regional variation, using learner language as a model in language classes, how to teach or whether to teach swearing and taboo language in the classroom, gender fair language and intercultural reflection using telecollaboration projects. So this is it's an edition I'm really, really proud of because it kind of it brought together articles from people from all over the world. And it was really nice to see that so many people out there are working on this within the German context. And I think it was for both of us quite heartening. Hey, this is just something, over the years, my work, and forgive me again for bragging a little bit, has been picked up by the media as well. But one thing they tend to focus on is this idea of slang. So quite a lot when they look at my papers and then when journalists contact me and say, can we have a chat about diversity? They always want to find an angle to sort of liberate or legitimize slang, which is an interesting one. So you can see here a paper in National Geographic, one in a Swedish newspaper as examples for this. Okay, I've been talking for a long time. How are you getting on? Has anyone found the common thread? Or any ideas? Sorry again? Gooseberry. I love that. So for people watching online, someone said gooseberry might be the common thread. It's the most. There's an Irish castle that's called Gooseberry Castle. I mean, that is by far the best and most creative answer I've ever got. I'm afraid it's not the answer I was looking for, but it's a very good one. Now, how do you say fence in German? Zaun. How do you say garden in Dutch? Tuin. How do you say town in English? Town. How do you say fortress in Irish? Dune. And how do you say singleton in English? Singleton. I mean, the kind of the answer is, and I set you up for failure because you couldn't really find that out, is all these words are related. And I find this is a really, really interesting example in my view, because they all come from words meaning sort of a stronghold that then turned into a fence or enclosure. And then in those different languages, they have taken on a slightly different aspect of the meaning. So in German, it's become the means by which something is enclosed. In Dutch, it's become something that is enclosed by a fence. In English, it's become sort of a bigger thing that is enclosed, a town. And then we have an Irish to fortress. And in English, there's a suffix indicating a single unit. I find it fascinating. You don't have to agree. You do not have to agree. Okay. I'm nearly at the end. I wanted to very briefly mention a second project I've been working on for a long time. And you've got some postcards on your tables as well, if you would like to find out more about this. Now, this is a project that I've been working on with colleagues from Newcastle University, Westminster University, University of Birmingham, and the University of Bristol for quite a few years. And this is about thinking about the potential of linguistics in language teaching and learning in schools. And I've already mentioned these sort of mini courses to teach linguistics that we've created and delivered. We've also done some CPD sessions for teachers. The kind of thing I would like to focus on in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll be done, is a co-creation project, which to me has been an absolutely fascinating experience. So this was about academic linguists and teachers in schools working together to create language teaching materials that are informed by linguistics. For example, linguistic diversity, the kind of stuff I've showed you just now. And sort of the academics offered their research expertise and the teachers offered their pedagogical expertise. And what we did is we created materials for French, German, and Spanish. And I think they're really good materials, if I may say so myself. And we kind of wrote them out and had them tried and tested in lots of schools and gathered feedback on this. Partly because we wanted to find out what do teachers and students think about these materials with a slightly different novel angle and with a focus really on thinking about language rather than other parts, other things that you could think about in language teaching. So for example, what we found is that A-level cultural topics, something like cyber society, is a topic on the curriculum, but it doesn't really include thinking about language in the cyberspace. And we thought this is really a shame. There's something missing here. There's really an interesting angle missing here. And what we found is that the teachers thought these were really interesting and easy to teach, even if they didn't have a background in linguistics themselves, which is partly because we included very extensive teacher notes. But the students, lots of students also said, this is really fascinating. I've never really thought about it this way. This is such a different way to learn about language. And again, something I'm very proud of is we just won Newcastle University Engagement Award for this project, for a research project focusing on inclusive education, because it has this diversity angle. And the materials also have now been bought by Oxford University Press. So they've been rolled out into lots more schools. So this is something like a project, like a real project, real passion project of all of us. I've got one more conclusion slide in a minute. Before I do that, I wanted to return home to Leeds, because I wanted to just really say why I'm so happy to be at Leeds. Well, one of the many reasons, and why I feel so at home, not just personally being part of this community, but also academically. So at Leeds, we have a very large, very important and very interdisciplinary School of Languages, Cultures and Societies. And I think a lot of the research we do is so inherently impactful, which is shown by just the diversity of Language at Leeds, which is a collaborative research network that is sort of born in the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies, but has collaborators from lots of other schools and areas at the university as well. And I've just picked 3 themes from Language at Leeds: pedagogical linguistics, embracing linguistic diversity, and the Centre for Excellence in Language Teaching, which is based in Language at Leeds as well. And I think you can see from these themes and what I've been telling you right now, why this is the right place for me and why I'm so happy here and why I think this is so brilliant. So as a conclusion, this is my conclusion slide, and I gave it the title, Language Teaching Needs Language Science. It's in quotation marks because it's actually the title I've chosen with my collaborators for a chapter in an upcoming volume on the future directions in the humanities, where we make the case that language teaching needs language science. I think it summarizes it really well. I also like this quote: language is an important part of our world, and learners are entitled to know how it works. I think it's more than entitled even. I would argue it's a necessity, not just for learners, but also for teachers, for educators. Language educators in particular, but all educators really, I think, should know a little bit about how language works. I think I'm probably going to spend the rest of my career making this case for language learning and for linguistics being an essential part of it. Again, with colleagues from the Linguistics and MFL project, we've created a manifesto for linguistics and language teaching and learning. And a couple of years ago, I think, we were invited to present this at a meeting of the all-party parliamentary group for modern languages at the House of Lords. This is us in Westminster, which was one of the proudest moments of my career so far, only second to this moment right now. I can be melancholic. So to finish, I would just take a few moments to say thank you, because academia can be a really tough place, but it's also an incredibly rewarding profession. And what I really found in my career is you need others. You need your colleagues, you need your friends, you need your students. So first I want to say thank you to my friends who have come here from Germany, from Scotland, from Long Eaton, from Chapel Allerton. And thank you to those also watching online. I know there are people from Germany and from France watching online, and your support and friendship really, really means a lot. Thank you to my wonderful colleagues, both within German studies and the linguistics community, in the faculty leadership, within the student education community. I wish I had the time to name every single one of them, but we do want to have a glass of wine in a minute. But I hope you know who you are and that I'm really, really deeply grateful. Special thanks also to all my LCS colleagues. You have really given me an academic and intellectual home, but also a really wonderful community. I said I wouldn't name anyone, but I do want to name a couple of people if you forgive me, because it may not come across, but I'm not the most confident person all of the time. And there are some colleagues who have always been encouraging me ever since I've arrived at Leeds. And when there's like a faculty role going, and I was like, oh, am I good enough for this? I don't know. Those colleagues always said, of course you are, go for it. So thank you, Emma Cayley, our head of school, Rasha Solomon, and Nina Waddleworth. I really wanted to mention you because you have been encouraging me so much. I kind of wanted also to say thank you to the colleagues who haven't supported me, because there's been, I think you have to be realistic. Academia is a tough place, and there have been quite a few colleagues over the years who have not been very nice to me. I remember one situation, and I'm going to share this with you now, where a colleague said to me, you're not a real academic, you'll always just be a language tutor. And that was meant as an insult. I mean, like, being a language tutor is something bad. But that was meant as a really, really stark insult. But I want to say thank you to those people as well, because you've made me stronger and more determined, and look where I am now. Thank you. Okay, last but definitely not least, thank you to my students all over the years. Some of them are here. Thank you for coming. I've had some of the best discussions with students, but it's also always been really nice to see you develop your own academic interests, your voice as researchers, see you flourish in your careers, and it makes it all worth it. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Emma, and then we'll have a glass of wine. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. All right, hopefully people can now hear me. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sascha, for that huge tour de force, which I'm not going to try to capture here at any length. You'll be glad to know, because I know I'm the only thing standing between you and a drink upstairs. But I just wanted to say what a rich lecture it's been. I've personally learned a huge amount about the beautiful diversity and connectedness of language. We've learned about the medieval Arabic origins of Maltese. We've learned about how to greet people on a first date, which is obviously quite useful for some of us. We've learned about the meaning of scholosopy, which I think should be the new university word for scholarship. And we've learned about the Welsh and Scottish Gaelic, I think, meaning of penguins. And perhaps, you know, not necessarily more importantly, but just as importantly, we've heard that the task of the linguist is to dispel absurd notions and prejudices. And at the risk of soapboxing a little bit, at no time is that more important than now, when public rhetoric about languages, the arts and humanities is so negative and damaging, and when the data that we have to rely on is so unreliable and so easily manipulated to one or another end. Britannia insula est was one of the phrases that really stuck with me from this lecture. Britain is an island, or perhaps Britain is insular, to say it in a slightly worse way. Sascha's really one of the key people who's helping to dispel that myth in UK languages education, and he's part of the effort to reverse that situation that he set out so clearly in the lecture. And he and many of us in this room are currently working behind the scenes with the DFE and the current government curriculum and assessment review to try to ensure that that vicious cycle or circle, I can't remember which it was, that Sascha described can be broken, and that future generations can learn our disciplines at all levels in the UK. Intercultural, interdisciplinary and impactful, I believe, I don't know where Penny Goodman is to be the new LCS tagline for research and scholarship. And I would say that Sascha's research and scholarship 100% embodies that. Intercultural, interdisciplinary and impactful 100% embodies that ethos. And I especially applaud his very important work to develop the understanding of scholarship, or scholosophy, as we're going to be calling it, as a discrete category in the school and the wider institution. It's fantastic and really not surprising to see him elevated so quickly within the university, and we all, I think, wish him all the very best for what will surely be a stratospheric career. So now please join me in congratulating Sascha one more time, and you're all invited to drinks and snacks upstairs on the ground floor.
Let's have a drink.